Now, some people may see the Brexit negotiations as a game of chicken, and the International Trade Secretary certainly ruffled some feathers today after suggesting the UK may not rule out importing chlorine-washed poultry from the US after the country leaves the EU. Liam Fox is in Washington for the start of talks over a post-Brexit trade deal with America, but how important could that and other agreements be to Britain's future? Our economics editor Ed Conway is at the screens with more.
Well, let's start by reminding ourselves why this matters. And it matters because the US is a big destination for UK exports. Not the biggest. The EU is the biggest recipient of UK exports, about £222 billion worth going through in 2015. But there's the US, £100 billion worth of goods going across from the UK to the US. And the other key thing about this, I'll add the rest of the world as well, that's the rest of the world. The key thing about this is that the UK exports more than it imports from the US. So it's very important for the UK's trade balance. What's also interesting, actually, when you compare the US to the rest of those countries and areas, is that the UK actually exports more in the way of services, so things like legal services, banking, finance, stuff like that, than it does goods. And that really matters because it is services. For a lot of people, it's services that matter in the future. But services trade isn't the kind of old-fashioned thing where you're talking about tariffs on goods going across borders. It's not really about, you know, we'll charge you 1% on your car and so on. It's about standards, it's about product regulations. And that goes for goods and services, particularly for services which the UK is so focused on. And those tariffs that I'm mentioning, they're less important than they used to be. So this shows you just how much tariffs add to trade with certain parts of the world. So you can see very high in China, pretty high in Japan, and relatively high in those other countries. But let's add on what we call non-tariff barriers, and that means product standards, as I'm mentioning, regulations, the rules that you lay down in a country that can impact exports into it. And that, this red part, non-tariff barriers, is far more important when it comes to the UK's trade relationship with the rest of the world than tariffs. These are the bits that we really need to focus on in the future. And that is why this issue of chlorinated chicken, whether you're going to wash chicken with chlorine, has come up. It's not about the charge, the amount of money that you charge at the border for chlorine. It's about the rules you impose on it. Or indeed this question of whether the UK is going to start importing hormone-fed beef or genetically modified crops. That's the issue, and that's why we're talking about that. And that's why Liam Fox was talking about it just earlier on in Washington.
In a debate which should be about how we make our contribution to global liberalisation and the increased prosperity of both the UK, the US and our trading partners, the complexities of those, the continuity agreements, the short-term gains that we may make, the opportunities that we have and our ability to work jointly towards both a free trade agreement and WTO liberalisation, the British media are obsessed with chlorine-washed chickens. A detail of the very end stage of one sector of a potential free trade agreement. I say no more than that.
As you heard there from Liam Fox, we are talking about a tiny fraction of what the UK imports. Have a look at this. This shows you total UK imports back in 2015. And just look on the far right-hand side. Poultry, chickens and so on, accounts for less than £1 billion worth of our imports. The total amount of imports is £510 billion worth. And it just reminds you, this issue over poultry, over chicken, is likely to be reflected in every different sector that we export and indeed import from around the world. That is why trade talks, they could be big for the UK, but they will be complex and they may take some time.